So this is going to be my final video about the separation of powers between the federal government and the state government. The denied powers for both the federal and the state governments. Neither one of the governments can grant titles of nobility, so there is no elite that is above the law. In a democracy, everybody is below the law, right? In a republic, which is a representative democracy, nobody is above the law. Everybody is subject to breaking the law and therefore being arrested and going through court and being put through trial. Neither one of them can allow slavery. Neither the federal government nor the state government can allow slavery to exist. So that doesn't ever happen unless they go to jail. Then their rights can be taken away if they go to jail. Deny citizens the right to vote due to race, color, or previous servitude, or deny citizens the right to vote because of gender. So they can't stop people from voting. So the denied powers for both state and federal government. First of all, the Bill of Rights, right? They can't take anybody's freedom of speech or peacefully to assemble. Denied powers are just powers that they cannot ever cross, they cannot ever do. And the state and federal government can do a lot of things. They're totalitarian, fascist organizations. They can take people's property. They can tax people. They can pass laws, charter banks, charter corporations. There's a lot of concurrent powers that they both have, right? And it's a whole bunch of powers. Especially the federal government provides for the general welfare, and that's why they have the concurrent powers. But that's been expanded to almost an incredible degree from way far from when the founders actually had established the federal government. The federal government, the expressed enumerated powers, which is only less than like 10 expressed rights, including printing money, regulate interstate commerce, making treaties, conducting foreign policy, declaring war, providing army and navy, establish post offices, and make laws necessary and proper to carry out those powers. Those are the expressed rights. So any other power, really, that's a power grab, okay? The state government should have all the other powers besides those. But the federal government has been continuing getting bigger and bigger. Nobody says anything about it. It doesn't say that they do have to provide education or health care. That generally has been the state, and since it's a locally purchased thing, vouchers is just such a great idea. You can go to a Sudbury school, which is what, $5,000, which is a democratic institution which actually respects your sovereignty and autonomy, and you only study the things that you're curious about, so therefore you'll be studying things that actually matter. The Sudbury School, which is way cheaper than a public education totalitarian fascist school, which makes you blindly obedient to arbitrary authority. That's all public education does, and they charge $8,000 to $9,000 to do that. Listen to the teacher. Why? Just because I said so. That's why. That's Julie Nazi Chandler, right? So Chandler, or fascist, or Hitler, whatever. Compare the two. The federal government getting involved with the national education and the Common Core. I mean, that's pretty. Kentucky passed the Common Core, so maybe because we're passing laws, without really fighting and knocking it down. So that's really the general separation of powers between the federal and state government. I want to bring up the gay rights, the homosexuality, how the federal government and how the state government actually is employed when it comes to the homosexual rights in this state. And I also want to mention the Whiskey Rebellion too. So you had the Articles of Confederation, which initially, George Washington and the colonialists and the Americans, right? They defeat the British, and yay, we're all free. We're an independent country, and we get to establish our own government. Well, we write the Articles of Confederation, which says that 13 colonies is now 13 countries, and they're all part of this union, right? A very thin union, and all they have is express powers, but no implied powers. Well, it turns out it was really weak, and so therefore they needed to strengthen it up in order to make it stronger. And they strengthened it up, I think, after the Whiskey Rebellion. I could be wrong on this, but I think Howard Zinn said something about the Whiskey Rebellion is the reason why they said, no, the Articles of Confederation is not strong enough, so we need to have something stronger. And then that's why we got the U.S. Constitution, right? So we didn't want a centralized government because we saw what happened with King George III, which was a German. I don't know if you knew that, but that was a German. And so King George III, he had a central government, and it was tyrannical, and they didn't like the tyranny, and that's why we had Articles of Confederation, which sort of made a loose confederation of 13 countries. But the U.S. Constitution came by, and they said, no, we're actually all one country. It regulated how the states treated each other, and also had its own exclusive powers. So that's the Whiskey Rebellion happened in 1791 during the presidency of George Washington. It says it happened from 1791 to 1794. It would be actually, when was the Constitution written? Because I feel like it was 1791 when it was written. So I'm just going to Google U.S. Constitution real fast. And so we'll go with the Wikipedia. I'm going to go with Wikipedia on this. But the Whiskey Rebellion, essentially, it was so you had all these farmers, and they didn't have any money, and they were using whiskey as a medium of exchange, right? So they wasn't using gold or silver or greenbacks. They were using their leftover grain and corn, because you could turn grain, wheat, and corn into whiskey, right? You can turn corn and wheat into an alcoholic beverage, right? It gets people drunk, and then with the whiskey, you can exchange the whiskey as, you could use whiskey as money. So the whiskey then, because that's what they were using, they whenever you use whiskey as a medium of exchange, then they had to pay a new tax, which is what Alexander Hamilton wanted to do in order to increase the central government power, but also to pay for the war debt. How are you going to pay for the war debt? Well, we're going to tax people's exchange of whiskey. Many people, farmers had resisted. Many of them were war veterans. They said that they were fighting for the principles of the American Revolution, in particular against taxation without local representation, while federal government maintained the taxes were a legal expression of the taxation powers of Congress. It's true, the U.S. Constitution, but when did the U.S. Constitution become into effect? Throughout countries in throughout counties. So the Whiskey Rebellion happened in western Pennsylvania. I'm going on and on about the Whiskey Rebellion because the Constitution was put in effect in 1789, has been amended 27 times. So no, I guess I might be wrong about this. But the Whiskey Rebellion just shows that it's the Leviathan. The government is the Leviathan, and you can't use violence in order to not pay your taxes, because they are allowed to force you to pay your taxes. So, you know, Clive and Bundy, he was talking about the American Revolution, no taxation without representation. But then people said, well, what about the Whiskey Rebellion? And the Whiskey Rebellion had showed that Whiskey Rebellion had showed that there was that people could actually use that the government would smash, you know, any armed insurrection that was going on. So there was it came to a climax in 1794. U.S. Marshal arrived to serve writs to distillers who didn't pay the taxes. So he's, passing out subpoenas and stuff for them to come to court. And when they found out that had happened, 500 armed men went to the tax inspector General John Neville, and they attacked and burned his house down. But when that had happened, George Washington called 13,000 militia up from the governors of Virginia, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and he led that militia to prevent that rebellion. Even though they still didn't pay the tax, they weren't going to use violence against the tax collectors anymore. So that was the Whiskey Rebellion, right? So now we had a strong central government that if you didn't want to pay your taxes, it wasn't Pennsylvania could do whatever they wanted to do. But Pennsylvania had to do what the federal government said they had to do. So therefore, George Washington had successfully took all the power, right? So homosexuality in Kentucky sucks that I waited till 8:30. So if you're just checking, go to 8:30. But just recently, a federal judge, John G. Hayburn II, who was actually appointed by Bush Quayle, Daddy Bush, in Louisville, so this is a federal judge in Louisville, he had knocked down a part of the homosexuality illegality in Kentucky. So Kentucky, there's a sort of a long history of hating gay people in Kentucky, and it's been going on for quite some time. The recent poll says that 35% of Kentuckians are in favor of gay marriage, but 55% oppose it. So the majority, but not the vast majority, before the voters in November 2004, there was an amendment that George Bush had put up, because clearly if you're a homophobic piece of shit, then you're going to vote for the Republicans. So that's a Karl Rove tactic. They put the anti-gay amendments on the ballot. I mean, to stop gay people from getting married, that's the same thing as free speech and the right to assemble and right to bear arms, right? That's the Bill of Rights. He offered an amendment to discriminate against gay people. They didn't give a crap about actually passing the law, but Kentuckians fell for it anyways in overwhelming numbers. So in 2004, 75% of Kentuckians hated gay people. So that number has actually dropped. 2004, 2014, 10 years from then, it's only 55%. So still the majority of the people are against it, but the numbers are lowering. 13 states in America allow homosexual marriages. People should be allowed to do whatever they want to do. Consenting adults should be allowed to do whatever they want to do in the privacy of their own homes. So it's absolute bullshit that we're actually having this conversation. So let's see. So 13 states still allow it. Eric Holder points out that the law is discriminating, that there were blacks back in the day. They had laws that were discriminating against black people, so it's actually good to ignore unjust laws. So Eric Holder is siding with Jack Conway. So Jack Conway is the Attorney General. You have John G. Hayburn II, and he had knocked it down because of an equal protection clause. And this is relevant to the whole conversation between the federal government versus the state government. It actually almost hits the absolute crux of it. And I also think that they're not using the Constitution the way it should be used. So the 14th Amendment says that everybody is guaranteed the due process and the equal protection clause. So everybody, that was black people, right? That was 14. That was the Civil War amendments. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were the Civil War amendments, and the due process and equal protection clause had protected all black people, newly freed black people, or white people that defended black folks, that defended them of due process. You couldn't throw them in jail. You couldn't deprive them of liberty unless they went through due process, equal protection. Everybody under the law had the same protection. So John G. Hayburn had looked at the laws in Kentucky, and he says, well, to deny a gay person the right to marry, that's not guaranteed, that's not equal protection. That's not with the 14th Amendment. And he's right about that. He had knocked down the recognizing other people's states. So you got 13 states that recognize homosexual marriages. If you get married in California or Massachusetts or any of the other states and you come to Kentucky, they have to recognize it. That's what John G. Hayburn's ruling actually signifies. If you get married in a different state and you come to Kentucky, then Kentucky, even though they had passed the 2004 amendment, which illegalizes gay marriage, because of John G. Hayburn, if he was married in Massachusetts and come back into Kentucky, then it works. It's acceptable and it's okay. So good news. That's good. That's a step in the right direction. It's not full-blown legalization of gay marriage just yet, but it is a step in the right direction. So it only recognizes marriages elsewhere, but it doesn't actually legalize it. But there is another suit that's on its way. So that's sort of the general sort of scope of the thing. I believe that they're not using the Constitution correctly because they're using the 14th Amendment, which is the due process and equal protection clause. Yeah, that's right. I mean, that does tie into the civil rights and the Civil War and black folks getting the right to vote and becoming citizens. So it's a correct argument, but a way more powerful argument is the full faith and credit clause. The full faith and credit clause said that each state must honor other states' public acts and records. So in judicial proceedings. So therefore, public acts and records. If I had adopted kids, then those kids would be still adopted in this state. If I had married somebody in another state, then that's recognized in this state. Exactly what the hell, that's exactly what we're looking for. That's exactly what the gay movement should be looking for. The full faith and credit clause states that each state must honor the other state's public acts and records and judicial proceedings, right? So of every other state. So that's what the state is supposed to do. So the full faith and credit clause absolutely protects homosexual marriage in all the states now. As soon as one state did it, now it opens the door for all the states to be able to protect it. And they should use the full faith. My criticism is, they're saying the 14th Amendment due process and equal protection clause, which actually is only interpreted to make sure that the first 8 amendments of the Constitution is applicable to the states. So you can't take any due process away from anybody, right? Everybody is protected equally. It's a correct argument, but it's sort of harder to get there when the full faith and credit clause specifically says you must honor other states' public acts and records, right? So if you get married in Massachusetts and you come to Kentucky, that doesn't mean you're divorced. You was married in Massachusetts. You're still married if you come to Kentucky, to visit your family for Christmas, or if you just came here to live. So that's sort of the what's going on in Kentucky right now. there's a greater history to it, and actually I probably will do one more video because I want to talk about the labor unions too, and sort of how the powers. It's crazy how the federal and the state government, you know, sort of vie for power between each other. But labor unions is the people. It's working class people. So how has the government, have they been nice to labor unions? Have they not been nice to labor unions? They had used the Constitution, Grover Cleveland did, in order to smash the Pullman strike. He had said that they was interfering with interstate commerce. They were against the postage service. The government's allowed to set up a postal service, so therefore they were stopping it. They're allowed to protect the interstate commerce and then also the general welfare. So the Grover Cleveland had used violence in order to, you know, smash the labor unions back then. Is that how it has been throughout the entire years? Even Ronald Reagan did the exact same thing. So I'm going to, coming up, man, I'm on a roll, but I'm also going to talk more about homosexuality between the two too.